government that does not understand that every ward needs to have a clinic, a government that does not understand that every clinic should be run 24 hours, a government that does not understand that every single ward in this province should have an ambulance and there should be a doctor in each and every single clinic. Those are the problems that we're experiencing.
That is the problem of healthcare, an incompetent government that has not made it a priority to deliver services to their people, let alone the extension that is considered migrants.
Work of the economic freedom fighters in all of these spaces is to ensure that there is efficient public healthcare, and particularly primary healthcare given to our people, and that's what we do on a daily basis. We obviously at times have to find ourselves in a confrontational relationship with some of these operations, such as Operation Dudula, to a certain extent, the non-actioners of Mashaba.
There is a lot of a sense that the EFF is being hypocritical because the EFF itself has put up clinic blockades in Atteridgeville, and they are identifying this as a form of hypocrisy. Can you clarify the party's stance on what is happening in Atteridgeville and how that differs from Operation Dudula? Hello everyone, and welcome to the EFF podcast for a quick update. My name is Lebohang Mujapilu and I'm your host today. I have a very special guest here today, one of our own, Nkululeko Dunga, who is the EFF Gauteng Chairperson. We want to talk about Operation Dudula, xenophobia, and the charges the EFF has laid against Operation Dudula. Thank you for joining us today.
No, greetings to you, Mayor Mujapelo. Greetings to the Commander-in-Chief, fighters, commissars, and South Africans out there.
We're just going to shoot straight to it. Why has the EFF taken the decision to lay charges against the leader of Operation Dudula, Uzandile Dabula?
So we got a report to as the economic freedom fighters in Gauteng that there was an incident, which is not an isolated incident, we must admit, of continued blockages of public healthcare facilities, particularly clinics in and around Gauteng, particularly in the Johannesburg area, by a vigilante group called Operation Dudula, led by Dabula. We have been, interacting and trying to be extremely cordial in making them understand the unconstitutionality of their actions, particularly because the Constitutional Court in 2017 has pronounced in reference to access to public healthcare facilities for everyone who is in the borders of South Africa.
Yes, indeed.
And that has obviously fallen on deaf ears, and subsequently their actions has led to the death of a 1-year-old Praise Banda, whom his mother on the 30th of August tried to get access to primary health care in Alexandra, but was denied by Dudula. Went on to a second facility where she was then denied by public health care workers, on the basis that they were fearing for their lives. They mentioned to her that, Dudula was here. They informed us that you might be coming here. And if we assist you and they come here and they know that we're going to assist you, they told us that some action would be taken against ourselves, so we can't assist you. Breaking the oath of office of what it means being a healthcare worker. And she subsequently went to a private healthcare facility, but it was a little too late because the child died a couple of hours after that. We vehemently believe that the actions of Dudula operations led by Dabula is to blame and must account for it, because had the child and the mother not been denied the necessary public health care and access to it, well, whether it's public or private is immaterial at this point. The fact is there was a denial of healthcare
Yes,
to this
indeed.
particular child. And we had a responsibility as government to ensure that we actually look into it and we look at how best we can assist an ailing child and a mother who was crying for help. But the actions of Dudula led to the death of this 1-year-old. And to us, that's premeditated, because you would not have sat around a table and decided to deny people public health care and not be able to understand that the end goal of the denial of public health care can ultimately lead to the death.
So you
of
are
certain
saying
people.
that the way Operation Dudula is operating, by denying healthcare and being in the front of these healthcare centers to turn people away, is a deliberate attempt for people to die, essentially.
Definitely, because you would have not come to a reasonable conclusion of the denial of people access to health without having contemplated that they don't go there out of choice. They don't go there because they've got. They don't go there because they've got no choice. We don't go to a clinic and say, "Yeah, ke tlile ke tlo le checka." How are you doing? We go there because genuinely we require the services. In actual fact, many of us don't go to clinics even when we are at our most ill state, because we still believe in either self-medication or we need the rest and so forth. We use it as a last resort. And those people who actually do attend to these medical facilities are in dire need of them. It's not because they went there because it's nice being at a clinic. And you ought and you would have come to a reasonable conclusion to say that, no, if they die, they die.
Yes.
We're going to deny them public health care. We're going to deny them health care on the basis of what is perceived their origins from our end. And it's not just limited to South Africans, by the way. It goes across to all to not just what they would perceive as illegal, but to also South Africans whom they if you are dark, they identify you as an illegal foreigner. Myself, by the way, they always say that I'm a Pakistani or I'm a Somalian.
Oh, wow.
So now I must also carry around my dompas.
Your dompas to prove that you are worthy of healthcare.
Yeah, so it's vigilantism that we need to stop, and that's why we've opened the case of murder.
And quite extreme criminality as well, because, the intention for someone to die is quite extreme. Which then brings me to my next question around both Operation Dudula and the online Put South Africa First Brigade claim that the EFF is protecting illegal immigrants at the expense of South African lives, which they believe that they're protecting. How would you respond to this accusation, particularly given that they are denying their own involvement in the death of Praise Banda?
So we now know that definitely there was a program of action by Operation Dudula to actually run this particular operation in public healthcare facilities. So they can't divorce themselves from the actions of their own members and the directive. And if they are, then they should be able to pronounce to society what is their views on people having access to public health care, because they can at one point be the ones that say we're putting South Africans first, and therefore there must be a denial of access to public health care to illegal foreigners or immigrants or foreigners. And then at the same time come back and say that, we're never a part of this thing, we don't know anything about it. Then they should be the ones that tell us that, okay, if you knew and that you were given the opportunity to form part of it, what would have been your position as Operation Dudula? So that's the first position. But the second position is that the protection of rights and particularly access to health care is not only a limited right to an individual in terms of their own human right, because we all have the right to access to healthcare, but it's also in the protection of the greater parts of society and the greater parts of South Africa and South Africans. And we say this because there are certain diseases there are certain illnesses and sicknesses that are so contagious that need to be contained as quickly as possible. That you need to administer medication as quickly as possible so as to avoid the spread of those particular diseases and illnesses in the protection of the rest of society. Had we denied the right to access to ARVs, as an example, on the basis that we can't locate your citizenship, today we wouldn't be sitting with a low ratio of
detectable cases,
transmittable, cases, and that goes across to many other diseases, that we genuinely have to just zoom into and give the necessary assistance. And you wouldn't know, by the way, what someone is ailing from, unless you are given access to those particular facilities, and the relevant professionals are the ones who are able to tell you that it's just a headache, just do this or do that, or one or the other. But this is a deflection, by the way, by Operation Dudula on the inefficiencies and the incapacity of government, particularly provincial and national government, to administer public health care. And the reason why we say that is because the Department of Health in Gauteng has in excess of 65 billion annually in terms of budget. And they remain one of the departments with the highest level of corruption. They are buying millions and millions of rands worth of VORS in Tembisa Hospital. The PPE
they were buying
scandal.
jeans at some point.
You know what I mean? The PPE scandal is attributed to the Department of Health.
Yes.
The infrastructure development or non-development, by the way, Helen Joseph Clinic remains, a sore and sore eye to the many, because so much money was plowed in there, yet there's no output. Charlotte Maxeke, may her soul rest in peace, if she were alive and sees the state of that hospital,
which
that
is still recovering
after
from.
her. Yeah, one section of it was burnt down, and they're still finding it difficult. Tambo Memorial is in shambles. We could mention so many hospitals. We could mention so many primary health care points, which are in excess of about 375 here in Gauteng, that are extremely dysfunctional. Not as a result of because there's a continuous migration, because the tenseness of administration of health here in Gauteng is also on the basis that we've got many other people who come from other provinces looking for health care within our space as well. But that shouldn't be the reason why we can't genuinely and effectively deal with those matters, because that's why the competency of primary health care lies with the province and national, because there's that particular understanding that it's not just about micro management of society, but the greater part of South Africans. And the deflection is on those bases. 66% of South Africans in Gauteng are reliant on public healthcare facilities, which is about 20% below the national average. And even with the lesser reliance on public health care,
it's still not
not yet effective enough. And if this was a caring government that is able to plan meaningfully, we're supposed to have taken care of at least 100% of society in terms of public health care. But we're struggling even with the 66%. So once you increase it to the 84% of the national average, would have a collapsed government already in terms of public health care.
I understand that. Just to go back to the Operation Dudula and the police action you have taken. The action you have taken by going to law enforcement. And yet there are people who feel like Operation Dudula has managed to perform its criminality and vigilantism in different healthcare spaces, and now they have entered schools, and there is incredible lack of response from law enforcement in this regard. And people are saying, why are the EFF not targeting law enforcement instead? Why is the EFF not going to the police and saying, why are you not acting, as opposed to focusing on Operation Dudula?
Yeah, we must first and foremost just, give credence to the JMPD under Kommissar Mgcinetswako, who's the MMC of Community Safety here in the city of Johannesburg, because upon realizing that there's a problem in terms of public healthcare facilities in Gauteng, they went on to do a program of action in the dispensation of more armed bodies of the state to take care of our facilities and to take care of our people in terms of seamless access to public health care. So the spilling over of the operation of this vigilante group, Operation Dudula, also speaks of the inefficiencies that we have expressed numerous times in the South African police services to administer security services to the people of South Africa. They too remain undercapacitated to deal with cases of criminality. There is such a huge backlog in terms of detective work. And it's just a mess at that forefront. So our confidence in the police force as well is extremely limited. There was a video, I think last week or so, that had circulated in the media spaces where there was a response by the South African police services at a hospital in Rosettenville. And they were met, it was two policemen who came and stopped the operation of Operation Dudula, who were chasing away people at the gate. Some of them were asylum seekers, provided their documents, but they were told to leave. Some of them, South Africans, don't have documentation. You must go and fetch your dumpas, who were made to leave. And then the police came to respond as a result of the management of the hospital. They came, the two of them, they were chased away. They were running with their guns, running away from the people of Operation Dudula. So there's also an incapacity and a lack of training by the South African police services to actually administer public policing and public order policing, that genuinely something must be done by. The response time at times is very weak to non-existent. They don't have vehicles to respond to cases. They don't have the necessary manpower. One day, and this is how I want you to look at it, there are 500,000 registered security guards at Psira in South Africa, with about 300,000 of them actively working on a day-to-day basis. But we only have about 170-something thousand cops or so. That means we've got more security guards
than we do have
policemen. So one day the security cluster decides to take over this country, they can.
They could.
They've got more manpower. They've got more guns than we do. They've got more infrastructure. And that is genuinely what the problem is that we've also relegated our responsibility as government to the private sector. But however, we have spoken to the South African police services, particularly in Alex as well, where we've outlined what should be a program of action in terms of these particular cases, as well as the Tshwane Metro Police Department as well has been actively involved. We are having challenges in the city of Ekurhuleni, particularly with the EMPD, because of a lack of political leadership there. But genuinely, they try and assist with the little resources that they have.
Okay. Before we round off, I would like to speak to perhaps even the language we use or have become accustomed to use when it comes to the question of migration. calling people illegal. it's I have used it most of the interview because this is the language we're used to, but
it's a
the
norm.
word as it comes off my tongue, it does not sound like something I should be saying because a person cannot be illegal. Like, you know, but the way that there's so much language, kwere, illegal, and many, even other words that have been used to describe people of other ethnicities within
the South African
within
context.
South African context. Like, how can we approach this idea of language and how we speak about people?
Yeah. Well, some even go to an extent of calling people aliens.
Aliens as well, yes.
It is a challenge. I mean, there can never be an illegal foreigner who is of African origin and is black in South Africa. Can't happen, you know. So once we disabuse ourselves from those line of thoughts, we'll have a greater appreciation of the historical context of where the economic freedom fighters comes from, and even the former liberation movement, by the way, because they exercised a lot of the struggle outside the borders of this particular country that they now lead. So there's an understanding and an appreciation of coexistence and cohabitating with the rest of Africans. It is a problem. It's not just xenophobic undertones. It's a xenophobic attack to identify someone as illegal outside of the context that maybe the explanation would be that there is no paperwork that speaks of this individual, but understanding the problems that we have in terms of our borders and the management thereof, in the understanding of our administration, particularly the Department of Home Affairs, in terms of the administration of our documentation.
Even for asylum seekers, refugee seekers.
There's a huge backlog that goes into the millions and millions of those who would want to have thorough and proper access, have the necessary documentation, but they are barred from it because of our own inefficiencies. And then we come back and label them as lesser human, because that's what we're trying to categorize people as lesser human than we are.
To justify.
And to justify it. That's why we're able to go to an extent of saying that now that we have identified you that you are not a human, you therefore do not qualify for public health care. You should not have access to education. You should not have access to water. You should not have, and then it goes on and on and on and on because we don't think that you are human. It's the same behavioral patterns that we saw that were exercised for black people by the white government, who attributed us as lesser human beings. We're doing exactly the same thing to our fellow African brothers and sisters. And the weird thing is that we don't attribute it. So we never come to a point of identifying that, no, but this particular white person could well as be just has been illegal in my own definition as what I would have identified someone of a much more darker skin than me. You know, Helen Ziller, for example, is of German origin there. No one says that she's illegal. She's an illegal immigrant. In actual fact, though, some of them are going to be saying that she's the most equipped to become a mayor of the city of Johannesburg, overlooking Komisam Mchini. Or anyone else for that matter from the economic freedom fighters, you know, just on the basis that they can't relate to them from a cultural or traditional perspective. Indeed. And then outside of that, because they are black, we always look to the masters as white people. So it is a genuine problem of self-hate exercised by Africans, and it ought to stop. And we will not stop speaking about it until it gets through to each and every one of us that we are one. And the call for the economic freedom fighters for the United States of Africa is in the interest of everybody, including South Africans. And the call for a borderless Africa is not the call for a borderless South Africa.
Speaking of documentation, and you're admitting that in South Africa there is a problem where foreigners are not coming in a well-administered manner. But in general, do you think South Africa has, in general, a documentation problem, even when it comes to its citizens?
No, most definitely. Being an organization, as I said, that is extremely grounded is to have an appreciation of the challenges that are faced by South Africans. And one of them is the inefficiencies of Home Affairs. Yes, over the years, they've sort of tried to introduce new technologies, new systems that are put in place, but we still have a serious challenge of getting our documentation, whether you are being a first-time applicant for an ID or having access to a passport or a duplication of ID numbers. Those are problems that exist. There's a large chunk, by the way, of children, South African children, who don't have access to their birth certificates because of late birth registrations or no registrations at all. There's a lot of mothers, South African mothers, who have given birth. And they are having that challenge of ensuring that their babies actually get registered with Home Affairs. And they will be having problems in the near future in terms of access to documentation such as identity documents, particularly either the smart card. Even the migration from the green book to the smart card
yes,
remains a serious challenge in South Africa, So those are the challenges that are experienced. But we also have a serious problem in terms of border control, in South Africa, where the borders of this country are superficial, in the sense that you can easily move and migrate from one point till the other with little restrictions, So once you advocate, and that's the position of the EFF. Advocating for a borderless Africa does not mean advocating for a borderless South Africa, because South Africa is not Africa. It's a part of Africa. So once you do that, that means that you need to align administration to be of unisense with all the countries that would collaborate this particular view of a United States of Africa. You would have to have one police force, you'd have to have one authority in terms of policy formulation, and ultimately even one Home Affairs,
yes.
and that's where everyone and anyone can account to a particular department and a specific body within the greater context of Africa. But we do have the challenge. I know in Gauteng particularly, the challenge of documentation is of great significance, and when you look at the number of what would constitute immigrants or illegal immigrants in that sense, they constitute anything between 3 to 5% of the population of Gauteng, who contribute to the economic activity of this province, and that's where we are sitting at. That really, is there a direct impact in terms of the socio-economic conditions of our people that is seemingly exacerbated by an incapacity of government to actually roll out service delivery to our people? The answer is definitely a no, because
so you don't believe that the number of immigrants, or what we could consider illegal immigrants, actually has an impact on service delivery in this province?
No, we don't. And to draw reference is one aspect of it. Statistically, we're told that about 66% of people of Gauteng actually use and have access to public health care. This is 20% below the national average. So, and even with the 20% below the national average, the province still cannot administer full public health care to its people. And it should be at 100%, by the way. We should be confident enough as a government to say that we can roll out public health care to 100% of the population, but there's just a portion that decides to go to private health care. But we should have the necessary capacity of 100%. But even with the servicing of only the 66%, we are still having serious issues.
Mm-hmm.
And you can only imagine what if the reliance on public health care was actually standing at 84%,
Yes.
like the national average. Would have no public health care
Yes.
like we don't have now. And we firmly believe that public health care in Gauteng has genuinely collapsed, not as a result of illegal foreigners or illegal immigrants or even immigrants, but as a result of an incapacitated government, a government that does not understand that every ward needs to have a clinic, a government that does not understand that every clinic should be run 24 hours, a government that does not understand that every single ward in this province should have an ambulance and there should be a doctor in each and every single clinic. Those are the problems that we're experiencing.
That is the problem of healthcare, an incompetent government that has not made it a priority to deliver services to their people, let alone the extension that is considered migrants.
Definitely.
Okay, so I want to go to that the EFF has condemned the police's inaction in dealing with Operation Dudula. Yes. They are, like you said, a vigilante group. They are present. They are able to enter public spaces and intimidate and remove people, which is, an action that is quite criminal if we want to look at it that way. And the police have not acted against them. Why has the EFF not held law enforcement accountable in the same way that you would like to hold Operation Dudula accountable?
Look, we have engaged the security cluster in terms of our concerns. That's why you would see in the city of Johannesburg there has been a positive response. We have engaged the South African police services. I know, we had a meeting in Alex as well to explain to the armed bodies of the state in terms of what our problem is, in particularly related to a vigilante group administering what they would call law, would ultimately lead to a lawless society where we have no respect for our men and women in blue, to actually carry out the responsibility of law enforcement and servicing our people in terms of security. So that has been done. But we obviously, as the economic freedom fighters, an organization that is extremely radical, militant, we also trust that there are processes and procedures that we need to outline and play out with all stakeholders. And in most cases, when society sees us as people who are easily agitated, would have been the last resort that we come to as the economic freedom fighters, because we would have had numerous engagements and conversations that lead to nowhere. And then we're forced to go down to the streets and be extremely aggressive in approach. So we are calling on the South African police services to actually come out and do the work that they need to do, and not relegate their responsibility to anyone outside of them, because they are mandated and they have a duty and a function, not only constitutionally, but also as public representatives in those spaces to ensure that they carry out the services.
Okay, thank you very much. Speaking of this, there is a lot of a sense that the EFF is being hypocritical, because the EFF itself has put up clinic blockades in Atteridgeville, and they are identifying this as a form of hypocrisy. Can you clarify the party's stance on what is happening in Atteridgeville and how that differs from Operation Dudula?
Well, look, we firstly create access to anyone to have access to public health care. In Gauteng, we, as the economic freedom fighters, administer at least more or less 80% of clinics, by the way. In Gauteng, we run the city of Johannesburg in terms of public health care. We run the city of Tshwane. We run Western District and a portion of Mogale City, as well as the city of Egoruleni, because we've got members of the mayoral committee who are leading the Department of Health in those facilities. They are approximately about 350 of these public healthcare facilities, by the way, who are extremely underfunded as a result of them not being a direct mandate of municipalities, but a mandate of the province.
Okay.
And the province has failed, in actual fact, to fund these clinics, meaning that we have to be self-reliant as municipalities, as members of the mayoral committee leading these particular
So
departments.
municipalities are now, in this case, not directly responsible for funding the...
No, they are not.
I'm saying they have to take up the onus to be
we have to take up the responsibility
because
of
the province
ensuring
is
the
not...
functionality, because the province has relegated that responsibility to municipalities. But the mandate of public health care purely lies with the provincial government, which has absconded in its duties and function. That's why you find some of these clinics, they are struggling, but at the same time, we're trying by all means to ensure that we keep them afloat with the little to no resources that we have and have access to. And the work of the economic freedom fighters in all of these spaces is to ensure that there is efficient public healthcare, and particularly primary healthcare, given to our people. And that's what we do on a daily basis. We obviously at times have to find ourselves in a confrontational relationship with some of these operations, such as Operation Dudula, to a certain extent, the non-actioners of Mashaba we had to deal with as well, who went into these spaces and tried to politically grandstand along the same lines with Operation Dudula. And we really had to come down, confront those situations. And that's what we do on daily basis as economic freedom fighters. So in Atteridgeville, Dudula tried the same thing in terms of barring people from having access, and some of them being South African, by the way. They were barred on the basis that some of them were Lesotho speaking, Sotho speaking people, and they were then categorized as people from Lesotho, and some of them for not having access to, not having identity documents with them, which has brought us back into the years of the Dompas apartheid laws. And that's the trajectory that they would want to take us to. But we can't allow for any of these organizations to deter us, as hence we also informed our structures that work with law enforcement, so that, because those people are extremely aggressive, by the way. Once you confront them to say you are not allowed to do that, the first thing that they do is pull out fists and guns on our fighters, and genuinely would always want to apply superior logic, which defines that let's have an engagement so that you have a greater understanding. So you will see from time and time again where the fighters would be amongst either Dudula or Action SA in their attempt to try and give a level of consciousness to them. But those parties also play on propaganda. So, and the regalia of the EFF is, as much as is the most sought after material, it's also accessible to anyone who would want to push a different kind of narrative. How many times have we seen some counter-revolutionary forces on our media spaces taking T-shirts of the EFF, either tearing them up or whatever the case might be, to signal they are leaving the organization because of one reason or the other, but one can't really direct them to being genuine members of the EFF. I know on one of these social media spaces, there was one guy who resigned from the EFF months and months back. He's a journalist. And then one time he writes a very long letter to say, no, I'm leaving the EFF. Then we're like, no, but you're not a member of the EFF. Okay. So those things do happen from time and time again.
Just to perhaps go back to, while we can say that Operation Dudula, is a kind of a rogue element in our country, there is, I think, a large number of South Africans who do feel like they do not trust you because of the idea that you prioritize illegal immigrants. And this case of Praise Banda and you standing up in this context makes them feel as if you do not care about South Africans. How will you be able to prioritize this case while still addressing and regaining a certain trust from those citizens?
Yeah. Well, look, a 1-year-old knows no citizenship. A mother who has lost their child does not matter as to where you're coming from and how you got here. So we must have a greater appreciation that children are born into this country, into these spaces, and they should never be sacrificial to whatever political expediencies that we might want to amass in society. We'll never celebrate the death of a 1-year-old on the basis that they are perceived to have come into this country illegally when they don't know. In actual fact, as to whether they were born here illegally or legally, they don't know that. It's a 1-year-old baby. And once society starts treating its most vulnerable parts of society in that manner, then we have lost all principles of Ubuntu. And we're not human. So we'd like to appeal to those South Africans who actually celebrate that one day it will be your child. And what would be the view? There are many men in South Africa, by the way, who have relations with people of foreign or migrant labors, and some of them, whether documented or undocumented, end up having children. Those are still our children. We still regard them as our children. Maybe it might be even difficult for them to actually ascertain those particular papers and identification documents on the basis that maybe the mother did not have the documentation, but they are still of South African origin to a certain extent. So it's a very huge problem that we are faced with. But this is an organization that protects. And that says it, that we're at the center of the protection of humankind. And why we say that is that there's no way that we can say that we're advocating for South Africans to be to be healthy or to live in a healthy environment, while we harbor people who do not have access to healthcare regardless of where they come from. Either the statistics of HIV/AIDS and the rollout plan of ARVs, the treatment of tuberculosis, as we had mentioned earlier on, cholera, pneumonia, malaria, those are all diseases that can spread so easily to South Africans themselves, and there is really a need for the containment of diseases. And the only way that you can do that containment for the benefication of all South Africans and South Africans at large is to ensure that we have the most efficient running primary healthcare facilities, so that we get to avoid the spread of such illnesses. And that's the premise that the EFF particularly comes from, on the basis that we have to protect you from yourselves at times, and we'll do everything and all means to ensure that we do that necessary protection.
There is something very, very hateful about turning away a 21-year-old mother with a 1-year-old baby who is ill, or turning away pregnant women who are on the verge of giving birth. Something very, very hateful about limiting someone's access to essential healthcare. What do you think is the cause of this deep, hateful xenophobia we're experiencing and the lengths that Operation Dudula is going to? But also it is the same xenophobia that the EFF is being asked to participate in and abandon the care, and be asked to say, if you stand with South Africans, you stand with hatred.
Yeah, well, the one is that there's a section of society that wants to impose its ideological stance and views. I don't even know if it's ideological, if xenophobia is ideological, thuggery views, unto the EFF. And with the assumption that we'll willy-nilly accept that for political expediency purposes, that's why you'll find in most cases they say, sizahlangana nani kuma local government elections, because they are trying to create an amoeba outside of the economic freedom fighters that must be able to shift and change form as and when the current dynamics dictate. And that's not what the EFF is. And we remain unbothered, by the societal views and norms at the expense of what is right. So look no further than the kickstarting of some already failed electoral campaign by Dudula operation. You would have seen in Soweto that that's where they start this thing. They try and start it emanating from that space, because that's where they come from. A few of the few that exist within Operation Dudula. And it's on the premise of the local government elections. That's why they started in Soweto and they start attending the clinics there. And so they are testing out the ground in terms of what is going to be the response. And then they go to by-elections and they are starting to contest at by-elections. But this is people who are rejected by society. Look at the statistics of local government elections, particularly in terms of by-elections that have taken place where they've contested elections. They're nowhere to be seen. The EFF keeps on growing and growing and growing in many of these by-elections. And we have shown consistently that there's a large constituency of society that actually resonates with the policies of the EFF. Our message has been misunderstood, by the way, and obviously for reasons that are to the effect that the EFF must never be found to be governing, because we don't take kindly to the status quo of what is happening, particularly in terms of the socio-economic conditions of our people.
Okay, so just to then address this, what is being missed about the EFF stance, and how do you want to respond to that in this moment right now?
Yeah, the EFF is very clear that we need a United States of Africa. That's one. With one administrative body, with one parliament, where the rules and the laws and legislation is drafted, with one police force, with one currency, and and that will ease off. By the way, once you have all of those, and everyone accounts, and everyone is accountable for, everyone is documented. The EFF believes in that every single person must be documented. Because the dangers of that lack of documentation is that you could pass away in the middle of traveling, whilst traveling, and would not be able to identify as to who you are, where you are from. That's a necessity of it all, there are criminal acts that are carried out by a lot of people. There's a backlog in terms of detective work and trying to find out who these people are. And this is as a result of non-documentation or lack of documentations and systems, So once that is done, we'll have a much more greater administration of who's who and where they are. It is going to increase our economic activity, by the way, because we are sitting in the position that Lesotho has access to water that South Africa needs. The city of Johannesburg does not have water. We can't manufacture water. But the mountains of Lesotho have over excess of water, that we really, really need. So with the borderless Africa, it will make it so seamless for us to have a much more greater economic participation between ourselves and the Lesotho nation, and therefore even creating much more employment, creating infrastructure development between the two countries, and it is extremely endless. The same thing with the people who live in the far north of South Africa. Majority of either whether you're in Zimbabwe or Mozambique, they still come to South Africa to actually purchase their basic needs, and go back to their country. of origin. But once you have a borderless South Africa, there would be much more greater participation economically between these particular areas, and it goes on and on and on and on. It's not per se that once we have a borderless South Africa, as we had mentioned earlier on, that a borderless South Africa, a borderless Africa does not mean a borderless South Africa where we're the only ones who are getting rid of our borders, but everyone else is keeping them. You know, it's going to make much more greater sense, because once you get to travel and you go everywhere else and you ask everyone else, by the way, including those people who are at the center of actually fighting the EFF in those social media spaces in regards to this, they look at the model of the United States of America as a catalyst of development in the country and economic activity. They look at the United Kingdom and the greater parts of Europe as a point of saying that, yeah, but why can't we be like Europe? But they forget that all of those countries and areas actually modeled themselves under the guise of what the EFF says as the United States of Africa.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you
for joining us today.
No, thank you for having us.